Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, how are you?
I have to put a bin under this to make it higher.
So we'll wait a little while to see if some more people are going to show up here.
I'm sorry, what purple?
Yeah, I'm just saying we'll wait a little bit to see if some more people will show up.
Right, and tech can have its own time. Yeah, Giselle, just Sheila, Needy, and I, we all, we love the disciple course you did, and the other lectures too, before and after. I saw Needy actually yesterday. Wait, what's today? Is today Sunday? Yeah, I saw Needy Friday.
Mhm.
We both live in Flushing, Queens, and in between us is the Ganesh Temple,
Uh-huh.
which has a vegetarian cafeteria, so and a store with products for the Hare Krishna recipes. So once in a while we do that. Yeah, and her husband came too, who goes to ISKCON Temple.
Oh.
I'm
Who's
an
doing?
aspiring devotee of Desvamarita Swami.
Of
No,
who?
aspiring devotee. Yeah, he's my aspiring guru, Devamrita Swami.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I have to tighten the japa. Like I want to do farmer time and get up like 10 a.m. I mean, I'm sorry, go to bed like by 10. Get up like 4 a.m. and do it in one sitting. Um, but anyway, I see the ISKCON lectures every day. Once in a while, you do it too. This morning was Hans Rupa. Gopala was the other day. I remember when he got initiated. It used to be Caesar. Because I used to
Who
see him
did?
at
Who did?
Gopala does great. You all do great lectures in your own way. Gopala Das. He's newer to the temple. He's back from Georgia. Yes, he did a lecture. Yes.
Oh, I see. Oh, so we've got Giridhara Charan and Indrani is on. You all can hear me out there?
Perfectly.
Yes,
Yes,
Maharaj.
Maharaj. Hare Krishna. Please
Hare
accept
Hare
our
Krishna.
praises.
Hare. So let me do an introductory kirtan and then the Mangala Archana, and then after that I'll get into describing, at least I'll give an attempt here to describe the glories of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janbalaba Giribharadari Jaya Gopi Janbalaba Giribharadari Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad, Paramahamsa, Paravajagacharya, Atto, Tarasato, Shi Mad, Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki, Grantaraj, Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Sambeda Bhakta Vrinda Ki, Gaur Premanandi, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees. All glories to Sri, Sri Guru, and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Om Agyanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Amilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shnapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandehang Sri Guru Sri Yuta Pada Kamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shivashakanvitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare
Hare
Rama
Rama,
Rama
Rama
Rama Hare Hare
Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Let me get something to drink here because my voice is drying out. So right. So, welcome to today's Sunday Zoom class of Radha Govinda Mandir. And today we are going to be discussing the life and times of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami. And some of you probably know he appeared in this world um, in 1874, which is quite a long time ago. Um, and he was the fourth child of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So today I'm not going to be able to cover all these different sort of segments of his life. They're kind of, at least I've put it down to about 9 different parts. I discussed pretty much the first 4 or 5 of them uh, in a lecture last Wednesday when I gave class during the morning, which is on the ISKCON NYC TV website, not website, but what do you call it? YouTube channel. That's what I'm trying to spit out there. So it's, I covered about the first 4 or 5 of them there. And today we'll kind of briefly go over that and then go on to the rest of his life. Bhakti Siddhanta had quite a whirlwind career. He did a lot of different things in a very short time. And he left the world in 1936, which is, the time that we usually celebrate his disappearance in the year before we celebrate his appearance, because he disappeared on December 31st, which is the last day of 1936. And then so January 1, 1937, he was already in Samadhi. So what I want to do is briefly go over the early part of his life. I won't be able to go into detail. If you want to get some more detail on that, you can go to ISKCON NYC TV, that YouTube channel on YouTube, and see the Wednesday talk that I gave about that. But we'll launch into it here. So let's get on with it. I wanted to read this poem because this is how we get the title of this lecture that I'm doing today, Adore Ye All the Happy Day. This was a poem that Srila Prabhupada wrote for Bhakti Siddhanta on Bhakti Siddhanta's appearance day. I don't know what year he wrote this, but it appeared in the Harmonist, and Prabhupada was unaware that that this poem was recorded anywhere, because turns out that one of our godbrothers, one of Prabhupada's disciples, found this poem in a archive of the Harmonist, and it's a very wonderful poem. The members of the Gaudiya Math actually referred to Prabhupada as poet. So here is the poem. It's only got 8 lines, or 8 stanzas, we should say. And it's a tribute to Bhakti Siddhanta. Adore ye all the happy day, blessed in heaven, sweeter than May, when he appeared at Puri, the holy place, my Lord and Master, his divine grace. O Master, the evangelic angel, give us thy light, light up thy candle. Struggle for existence, a human race, the only hope, his divine grace. Misled, we are all going astray. Save us, Lord, our fervent pray. Wonder thy ways to turn our face, adore thy feet, your divine grace. Forgotten Krishna, we fallen souls, paying most heavy the illusion's toll. Darkness around, all untrace. The only hope, his divine grace. Message of service thou hast brought, a healthful life as Chaitanya wrought. Unknown to all, it's full of grace. That's your gift, your divine grace. Absolute ascension thou hast proved. In personal calamity thou hast moved. Give us a life anew and fresh. Worship thy feet, your divine grace. Had you not come, who'd had told the message of Krishna forceful and bold? That's your right, you have the mace. Save me a fallen, your divine grace. The line of service is drawn by you, is pleasing and healthy like morning dew. The oldest of all, but in new dress, miracle done, your divine grace. So this poem was written by Prabhupada to Bhaktisiddhanta. And we can find that in the history of Prabhupada's interaction with his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta, he did not meet him enormous amount of times. He did not spend a great deal of time with him. But he first met him in 1922, and then he was initiated in 1933. So those are the two kind of more significant events that we can see that where Prabhupada came across the timeline of Bhaktisiddhanta. And Prabhupada was a householder, so he was not living in the temple. He met Bhaktisiddhanta only on certain occasions when there were certain things going on. So that's why Prabhupada had a deep connection with Bhaktisiddhanta. He originally met him not exactly by chance, but at a meeting that he had not intended to go to, but he was asked repeeded by one of his friends to attend the meeting, and finally he agreed, and that's where he met Bhakti Siddhanta on the rooftop. Yes, it was a rooftop of a number one Ultadunga Junction Road in Calcutta. So when he appeared at Puri, the holy place, we discover that Bhakti Siddhanta, at the time of the birth of his fourth child, who was going to be named Bimala Prasad, at that time he was one of the principals at the Jagannath Puri temple. So he was involved there. And the Rath Yatra would go, the procession would go in front of his house. And it came to be that the Rath Yatra cart had stopped just in front of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's house, and his wife, Sri Yukta Bhagavati Devi, came out of the house and used the opportunity, because the cart had been stalled there for a little bit of time, to go up on the cart, and the garland of Jagannath fell around the body of the little child, of Bimala Prasad. So this was Jagannath Puri, and Bhakti Siddhanta was born Bimala Prasad Dutt, the fourth son, on February 6, 1974. Actually, I think it's 1974, 1978. Let me take a quick look. No, it is 1974. All right. 1974. So I can't go over all these because I already have, so I'm just going to kind of race on through the earlier part of his life. We find that he had an education, mostly at the Ramapura school. He studied math and astrology. And he had a very, very powerful memory. He could remember anything. By age 7, he'd memorized the entire Bhagavad Gita. And he was given a Kurma deity by Bhaktivinoda to worship, which he did. And Bhaktivinoda began to teach him how to chant by the age of 13. So already at age 13, he's chanting. And, he drops out of college in 1895. So why does he drop out of college? Because he gives the reason in his diary that if he appears qualified, if he appears to have some position in the world, there will be much pressure on him to get married. So he figures that if I just appear like a dropout, someone who's foolish and never amounted to any kind of education, then there won't be such pressure on me to become married. So for that reason, he dropped out of college. However, he was more learned than most people. He studied so many things. He basically lived in a library at one point. So this is the nature of Bhaktisiddhanta's early life. And I told this story last Wednesday that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had suggested that he become initiated by Gaurkishore Das Babaji. And this he was also very eager to do because he was very taken with Gaurkishore Das Babaji when he first arrived in Navadvip. By this time, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is in Navadvip before he was in Puri. And that's where Gaurkishore Das Babaji arrives. And he asks Gaurkishore Das Babaji for initiation. Gaurkishore had not planned to give initiation. In fact, he had no disciples and he had no intention to have any disciples. So he told Bhaktisiddhanta, I will ask Mahaprabhu what he thinks. So when Gaurkishore Das Babaji said this to Bhaktisiddhanta accepted this. And then later, when he met Gaurkishore at a later time, he asked him, well, did you meet Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? Of course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had been absent from the planet a long time by this point, but Bhaktisiddhanta was confident that Gaurkishore could communicate with him if he wanted to. So Gaurkishore told Bhaktisiddhanta, yes, I met Mahaprabhu. And so Bhaktisiddhanta said, well, what did he say about initiating me? And Gaurkishore replied, oh, I forgot to ask him. Anyway, this kind of thing went on for a little while, but finally Bhaktisiddhanta pleaded that if you do not intend to give me initiation, and I see no reason to hold on to life. So when Bhaktisiddhanta saw that, rather when Gaurikishore saw that Bhaktisiddhanta was that intent on becoming a disciple, then he agreed to give him initiation in the year 1900. And this would be his only disciple that he would ever take. Um, which is interesting because Bhaktisiddhanta was very erudite. He knew several languages. He could write. He was accomplished in reading so many books, whereas actually Gaurikishore Das Babaji was illiterate. He was a pure devotee, but he was not literate. So the next segment of his life, I'm moving kind of quickly here in the very beginning stages because I want to get to the latter stages where there's a lot of other important information. He took a vow in 1905 to chant 1 billion names of God, which is equivalent to about 174 rounds per day. I did this by the math. He was chanting 300,000 names of God every day. So you do the division, it comes out to about 197 rounds. And it took him about 9 years to complete this vow, during which time, basically, he did not do anything except chant. He had a little bhajan kutir. And in his bhajan kutir, he was simply chanting basically all day long. And he would observe chaturmas, where he would just eat rice that was soaked and put on a flat, I think, stone or metal plate. And he would put his hands behind his back and, like a cow, bow down and just eat whatever he could do with one breath. And then when he had to stop to breathe, then he would stop eating. So he was very, very austere. And he had no time even to fix the bhajan kutir, which leaked when it would rain. So instead, he just put a umbrella above his head, and the water would come in through the hole in the roof, and it would bounce off his umbrella, and he continued to chant. So, as we said, this took about 9 years to complete. His first disciple was a Rohini Kumar Ghosh, who was actually supposed to be initiated by some Olas. We spoke about this a little bit in the Wednesday session, that along with the story of the unfolding life of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and also the unfolding life of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, they had planned to try to create a worldwide movement. And at the same time, this was a time when Gaudiya Vaishnavism was quite disreputable, because there were many unwanted and unauthorized groups who pretended to give the message of Lord Chaitanya, but actually they were completely confused, and often they would give versions of the scriptures, and they would try to recommend for people to follow various types of processes which were not at all recommended by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Many of them were either smartas or sahajiyas, these two categories. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur had prayed to the Supreme Lord to have a ray of Vishnu, and that way he would have some help in setting the record straight about what really was genuine Vaishnav philosophy and what was genuine Vaishnav practice. Whereas the Bolas and the Olas, they would do all kinds of deviant things. They were quite known for their ganja and other kinds of intoxicants. And generally, they would travel from one festival to another, playing some kinds of so-called devotional music, and then they would have uh, uh, romantic affairs with ladies at these places. And so this was their sense of how they were living Lord Chaitanya's um, philosophy, which was completely a travesty of it. So, at any rate, Rohini Kumar Ghosh was going to meet his future Ola gurus, and he had a dream that they turned into a tiger and a tigress, and they were eating him. And he was saved by Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati. And then actually he became initiated by Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati as, I think, his first disciple. And this just highlights how Bhaktisiddhanta is already beginning to do his main activity of helping to um, set the record straight and save people from these opposidantic smarta and Sahajiya sects. He was, Bhaktisiddhanta, a very controversial person. He was, this is a theme that we find throughout his life. Prabhupada said that Bhaktisiddhanta was sometimes known to have a chopping technique, which even some of his disciples objected to. Where if there was some kind of deviation, he would not at all be silent about it. He would make a strong point of it. And his life actually, at different points, was, you know, um, impacted by various kinds of controversies, which he dealt with very well. So in 1911, there was the Karma Jada Smartas who made the point that one could not engage in devotional service or initiate unless one was a brahmana. So people could not be initiated if they had not been born in a brahmana caste. Bhakti Vinod Thakur had planned to go to a debate that was scheduled at Midnapur, but he became sick. So Bhaktisiddhanta agreed to go in the place of his father, Bhakti Vinod Thakur. And of course, he spoke at this debate, which there were many police there because it was quite a heated discussion. And the police were afraid that a riot might break out. Of course, when Bhaktisiddhanta spoke, he won the day, and his explanation that anyone who actually follows spiritual life properly can become a brahmana. One does not have to be a brahmana only by some kind of birth. And that many people who claim to be brahmanas by birth are actually lower than Shudras because of their behavior. So just being birth brahmana is of no value. This was his explanation. And everyone was very satisfied in the Karma Jada Smartas lost the debate. The crowd pushed forward to get the dust from his feet, but he wasn't inclined to give his dust to everyone. The police constable, though, could understand that unless the crowd got a chance to get the dust from his feet, that a riot might break out anyway, even though the controversy was now settled. So they put his feet in a bucket of water and then sprinkled the water on everybody's heads. And in this way, the crowd was pleased. There was another debate later about with another group about whether Lord Chaitanya was in fact the Supreme Lord. They claimed that, of course, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Lord Chaitanya claims not to be God. He plugs his ears. So they said, well, we should accept this at face value. But at the same time, we know from the rest of Scripture that Lord Chaitanya, although he claimed not to be the Supreme Personality of God, he indeed was. And they also claim that the Gayatri mantra, where it mentions Chaitanya, was not an eternal mantra. Again, Bhaktisiddhanta debated this. And he met this King Manindra Chandra Nandi Bahadur, who had invited him to come and wanted him to speak and to take prasadam. And Bhaktisiddhanta did come to his palace. But this king was surrounded by Sahajiyas who didn't want Bhaktisiddhanta to speak because they knew that he was completely against their philosophy. So what happened was they kept making excuses and keeping the king from meeting Bhaktisiddhanta for a number of days. Finally, on the fourth day, Bhaktisiddhanta was actually able to meet the king, and he spoke for a short time, and they began to yell at him so that he couldn't continue speaking. And during the entire time, Bhaktisiddhanta didn't eat anything for 5 days because he didn't want to be contaminated by the food cooked by these Sahajiyas. The Sahajiyas, however, informed the king that the reason that the king hadn't eaten was because he considered that Bhaktisiddhanta considered the king to be low class, but that wasn't the idea at all. However, the king did meet Bhaktisiddhanta as he was leaving at the train terminal, and there Bhaktisiddhanta explained the real reason why he had fasted and why he hadn't eaten the king's food, because he did not have the ability to actually speak to the king as he had hoped, and that various pandits who prepare food, if they're in the wrong consciousness, that food is not actually prasadam, but it's contaminating. So in 1913, he established a printing press, which he called the Brihat Mridanga. That's where Prabhupada got the word that he used, or that term. And during this time, actually much earlier, there was a group of printers called the Bharatalas who had gone to a lot of effort to print these various apasidantic groups, to print their literatures, which were full of misconceptions and material concepts. So the next part of his life here was where in the year 1915 and 1914, his father and Gaurikishora both disappear. So in June 22nd, 1914, Bhaktivinoda Thakur disappears. And in November 17th, 1915, Gaurikishore Das Babaji disappears. And when Gaurikishore disappears, there is a controversy over his samadhi. There were many Babajis, and they all came, and they claimed to be Babajis, so they had the right to administer the samadhi of Gaurikishore. They knew that if they could have the administration of Bhaktisiddhanta Samadhi, that people would come, and this would give them a regular income. All they had to do was sit there, and people would give donations, and that was their motivation, even though they didn't really have much interest in Bhaktisiddhanta's philosophy. But Bhaktisiddhanta said that, well, I might not be a Babaji, I'm just a brahmachari. However, I am not a cheater. I don't have relationships with women while claiming to be celibate. And he pointed at all the Babajis, and he told them that you all are just cheaters. If there's any one of you who has not had, contact with a woman in the last 6 months, let him step forward. Then he said, well, not 6 months, 1 month. And then he said, well, 1 week or even a few days, then that person can step forward. And there were police there because they could see that this was becoming a heated interchange between Bhaktisiddhanta and these Babajis. And the policeman said, well, how do we know if they're telling the truth? And Bhaktisiddhanta said, I will accept whatever they say. And he said, if one of you who is lying touches the body of my spiritual master, know for sure you will be ruined. And so all the Babajis, without a fight, left. And that left Bhaktisiddhanta in charge of his own guru's samadhi. And Gaurikishora had also made a special request that when he would die, that people would take his body and tie it with ropes and drag it through the streets of Navadvip. And there were many Babajis and others who were prepared to carry out this request. And Bhaktisiddhanta said, I forbid you all to do this. This was just the humility of my Guru Maharaj. And if one of you steps forward to try to touch his body, he had a bat that he hit whoever it was that would try to come forward. And so therefore, the body of Gaurikishora was not dragged through the streets. The fact that both his father and his spiritual master had left within 2 years devastated Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And he thought, well, how can I preach in this situation? I had chanted for 9 years just so I could get the potency, the Shakti, to be able to deliver the world, because things are in a very bad way. And he felt depressed, and he was actually contemplating, well, maybe I should just continue to chant because I don't see how I can be effective. However, he had a dream that night. And in his dream, his father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his guru, Gaurikishora Das Babaji, the Panchatattva with Lord Chaitanya, Advaita, Gadadhar, Shivasade, Nityananda, the whole group. And some of the acharyas, they all appeared to him and they said, don't you worry at all that unlimited men, unlimited money, whatever you need stands ready. If you just preach, everything will work itself out. So he put aside his mourning and his feelings of insufficiency, and he began to preach. And one of the first things that he wound up doing was taking sannyas. So that's the next segment of his life here. And this happened in Brajapatna in March 29th, 1918. He took sannyas from a picture of Gaurikishora, because by this time Gaurikishora had left the world. And generally someone takes sannyas from either the spiritual master or from one of his godbrothers, senior godbrothers. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was the only disciple of Gaurikishora, so there was no one else to take sannyas from. So he took a picture of Gaurikishora Das Babaji, and he took sannyas from that picture. This, of course, created quite a large controversy. Many did not accept that he was genuinely a sannyasi now. And what's interesting is that at that time in the Gaudiya Vaishnava line, people didn't take sannyas. Instead, they became Babajis. His father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, didn't take sannyas. He became a Babaji. His guru, Gaurikishora, was also a Babaji. There were no sannyasis in the Gaudiya Vaishnava line. But for two reasons, Bhakti Siddhanta changed the system in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. And of course, this created enormous amount of controversy as well. He changed the system because, first of all, he could understand that most people who were calling themselves Babajis were by no means on the level that a Babaji should actually be. They were not actually any kind of celibates or any kind of advanced spiritual practitioners. They were simply, for the most part, cheaters. On the other side of the coin, there's a difference between Bhajananandis and Goshtianandis. So Bhajananandis are those who, when they become advanced in spiritual life, they sequester themselves off from the outside world and they begin to chant. And they chant pretty much all day long. In fact, that's all they do. And in this way, they relish the mellows of connecting with Radha and Krishna even before they leave their body. And um, during the time of the six Goswamis, they used to do this usually either in Radha Kund or Shama Kund, somewhere in that area. And eventually, because of weather and because of the sun, the system became to build a little samadhi hut, and they would stay in the samadhi hut, and there they would be protected from the elements, and they wouldn't be bothered by people from the outside, nor would they be molested by animals. But Bhakti Siddhanta, he was following the same idea of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and of his father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who wanted a worldwide movement. At that time, basically, when people were to join the Gaudiya Vaishnava movement, they would join a single guru with a handful of disciples, and that was basically the way it worked. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda had planned to cover the world in love of God. For that to happen, it would take a different kind of strategy, and that strategy required an organization. And so therefore, there had to be an organization of devotees. And rather than becoming advanced and leaving society, disappearing into Radhakund or Shamakund, into a little bhajan kutir, one should go out into the world as a sannyasi. So the Varnashram system actually was that one would go through brahmachari life, then into household life, then into vanaprastha, and then sannyas. And then after sannyas, one would take babaji, which would be the highest form where one would leave the varnashram system altogether. But rather than do that, Bhaktisiddhanta reasoned that these sannyasis should remain in a preaching mood. And in this way, the entirety of the world could be evangelized to Krishna consciousness rather than these Babajis leaving society and disappearing. So for those two reasons, that most people who were Babajis really weren't qualified, and also instead of disappearing, they should stay in society and give Krishna consciousness to others. So this was the reason why he took sannyas himself rather than taking Babaji. And this is why he instituted a system where those he made devotees and had risen to a higher level of spiritual accomplishment were given sannyas rather than encouraged to become Babajis, which is what the previous system had been rather. All right, so I'm going to continue to move on because there's a lot to cover here, and we want to talk about some of his preaching here. So during these years, uh, previous to that, we're talking about around 1918 and 1920, in this time. But from about 1920 to 1935, that's when the Gaudiya Mat became prominent. There was an idea by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, which he wanted to call it the Vishva Vaishnava Raja Sabha. But Bhaktisiddhanta decided to change the name of it to Gaudiya Mat. So he called it the Gaudiya Mat. In 1918, the Gaudiya Mat started by a building that was purchased by one of his followers at number 1 Altadunga Junction Road in Calcutta. And there were some householders that lived in the bottom of the building, but Bhaktisiddhanta would stay on the rooftop. And there he would give lectures. And in one such lecture, of course, in 1922, our Srila Prabhupada A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, he came. He was convinced by one of his friends that he should listen to this sannyasi who was very, very powerful, who was very, very pure and very knowledgeable. Although Prabhupada didn't want to go to hear the message of Bhaktisiddhanta, just out of deference to his class friend, he decided to go. And there he met Bhaktisiddhanta for the first time, and he challenged him, who will listen to India? We are under the rule of the English. And Bhaktisiddhanta said, that makes absolutely no difference. And Prabhupada was won over by Bhaktisiddhanta. And even before meeting him formally, Bhaktisiddhanta had already given Prabhupada a commission, a mission that he would have to give Krishna consciousness to those in the Western world. So this happened, of course, in 1922. And later in 1923, Bhaktisiddhanta opened a temple in, I think, Vrajapatana, the temple of the four sampradayas, where he wanted to unite the philosophies and the preaching of all four sampradayas, the Brahma sampradaya, the Sri sampradaya, the Kumara sampradaya, and the Rudra sampradaya. He wanted to unite them. And he built a temple where the philosophy and the general deities of all four sampradayas were visible. And he, in 1924, delivered his famous lecture, Humbler Than a Blade of Grass, or Be More Humble Than a Blade of Grass. And in that lecture, he talks about how it appears that being a spiritual master is a very haughty, very egotistical position, because you sit on a high vyasasana. The disciples come and they offer you worship. They never challenge anything you say. They accept what you say as if it was said by the Supreme Lord himself. And they offer you their money, their time, everything. So this appears to be like some kind of egotism. But actually, he said, this is what Mahaprabhu has commanded for us all to do, to take up this charge of being guru of others. And even though I feel myself not qualified, I will do this anyway. And if I go to hell as a result of taking disciples, then so be it. I'm ready to do this because this is what has been commanded to us by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So this was his famous lecture. In 1925, he led a parikram around Navadvip, but that parikram was attacked. Of course, later on, he would lead a parikram in Vrindavan, and there also he would be attacked. You know, he said many things against these various deviant sects, the Bolas, Olas, the Garanga Nagaris, the Atibaris, the Shanis, the Nada, Nadis. There were so many different ones. Bhaktivinoda Thakur lists some 13. Um, and because he spoke strongly against these different groups, they were angry and they roused others to attack uh, the parikrams that Bhaktisiddhanta would sometimes lead. So in 1927, he started the Harmonist, which was an English version of the Sajjanatoshini. And in 1926, he spoke quite at length at Daivi about the process or the system of Daivi Varnashram Dharma. And in 1929, he met an American professor from Ohio State University named Albert Southers. And Albert Southers spends some time with him in Krishnanagar, and he hears a lot of very interesting things, and he asks some good questions. Excuse me there. Take a drink of water again. So Southers first asks Bhaktisiddhanta about, he notices in India, of course, and many people do, especially Westerners, that sometimes in the carvings on temples, there are carvings of ladies or demigoddesses without anything on the top part of their bodies. And, you know, this seemed to him to be kind of improper, which you can see why he would think that. And Bhaktisiddhanta answered him very strongly that these images are not improper, that actually the Vaishnavas, those who follow the Vaishnava tradition, are very moral, even though Lord Chaitanya, he followed Krishna, who also Southers thought, you know, that Krishna, from what he knew about Krishna, appeared to be very immoral. But he said this morality has no place, because it's morality is there for us who are mortals, but the Supreme Lord needs follow no morality. Besides, the Supreme Lord is not after some kind of bodily comfort by sex life. He's actually after the pure love that the gopis give. And, you know, he spoke about morality. That was something I'd really like to get into at greater length, but there's not much time, so I'll just kind of go through some of these other things that Southers and Bhaktisiddhanta spoke about. Southers was interested in transmigration, and Bhaktisiddhanta explained that reincarnation is irrefutable, that many Christians even have tried to debunk it, but were unable to. And in fact, it makes sense. And then, of course, Southers asked about idolatry, how you worship these various forms. And that's when Bhaktisiddhanta explains about impersonalism, that the Supreme Lord actually does have a form. And that understanding the form of the Lord means that then you can worship that form. That form is not imaginative, nor is it concocted by an artist, but it's actually the form as described in Vedic literature. There was a kind of interesting interlude too, where Bhaktisiddhanta talks about Vedic evolution, but we don't have time to get into that. Of course, during this time, Bhaktisiddhanta begins to take up several very important um, modern inventions to use in his spreading of Krishna consciousness. Of course, there was the Brihat Madranga, as he called it, the printing press. Um, Previous to that, books had been written by hand by scribes, but now they could be done with the printing press. And why should a minister or a preacher or a sannyasi avoid the printing press when it can be a way to spread Krishna consciousness among masses of people? And of course, he rode in a motor car, which um, it was usually assumed that sannyasis would try to do the best they could to have the least possessions in the least wealth possible. They would wear cloth that wasn't even sewn. They would even wear a kurta. They would wear just a square piece of cloth. And they would not wear shoes. They would not certainly ride, even in a rickshaw, what to speak of a motor car. But Bhaktisiddhanta could understand that all these things were not helping the preaching, they were impeding the preaching. So therefore, he wore leather shoes, he would ride in a motor car, and he would wear a coat when it was necessary. And he did this because he knew that especially people in important places would take him more seriously if he appeared in this way. So during this time, around this period of time in the early 1930s, uh, he revises Sri Krishna Chaitanya, which was a explanation of the life of Lord Chaitanya by Nishikant Sanyal, who was a professor himself and was a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta, and later would play very strongly with helping Bhaktisiddhanta write things. And Bhaktisiddhanta publishes the Brahma Samhita, and he writes the Gaudiya Bhashya, which is a commentary on the Chaitanya Bhagavat. And then in 1932, he does the Brajamandala Parikram, which was also attacked because the caste Goswamis had become insulted by his preaching, and they wanted to lock all the temples up so that Bhaktisiddhanta would not be able to visit any of the temples when he brought his group of followers to Braj. So he also met briefly with Subhash Chandra Bose around this time, in the early 1930s. Subhash Chandra Bose came to him, and Bhaktisiddhanta said to him, "Don't put your eye on these men," because of course this was during the Second World War, and Subhash Chandra Bose was looking for recruits. He said, "Don't put your eye on these men. They are too skinny. Let them eat something and chant Hare Krishna." So he explained this to Bose. And then in 1933, he sent devotees to Europe, to England, and later on to Germany. In 1933, also, Srila Prabhupada was initiated by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He had been following Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati for 11 years. He met him in 1922, and in 1933, Prabhupada was initiated by Bhaktisiddhanta. And Bhaktisiddhanta then explained, or Bhaktisiddhanta explained to Bhakti Vedanta, our Prabhupada, about the importance of printing books, because one can preach, but books will be there. Books are solid. Books are lasting. Books can reach many people. So he said, if you ever get money, print books. And he instilled in Prabhupada the importance of printing books. and also in 1935, he confided in Prabhupada that there will soon be fire in the Gaudiya Math. He could see that his disciples were quarreling with one another over position and rooms in the very important Bagh Bazar temple. And in this way, he was sure that in the future there would be trouble. So now we'll get into the final days of Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati. Um, in 1936, in October, he exhibited illness when he was staying at Puri. And during that time, he makes a lot of interesting points, kind of like what Prabhupada did. He tries to get forgiveness from many people. And he talks about how um, he says, why should you worry about others? Work on yourself, amend yourself first, uh, rather than uh, find fault in others. He pointed to the importance of cooperation, and he read the Mana Shiksha. He was very intent on trying to take the instructions of the Mana Shiksha. And one important thing that he did toward the last was he said, I have given anxiety to many people. In fact, I think many people see me as their enemy. Actually, I am not their enemy. I was just speaking strongly to try to convince them to somehow realistically take up the process of Krishna consciousness. And one day, I think, that they will understand this and they will see that I was never their enemy. And he um, proposed to his disciples that do not be unenthusiastic when worldly people do not take to Krishna consciousness, but continue to try to give Krishna to others. And in this way, um, you know, he left the world um, on December 31st in 1936, so January 1, 1937. He was um, taken, and there was a great ceremony given by the members of the Gaudiya Math, and we will end with that. So that brings us right up to about a little bit over an hour. Um, so I thank you all for listening. If there's any discussion or someone wants to add something or ask a question, then we'll leave the floor open here, see if there's something to discuss.
Maharaj, can I ask a question about, I've heard that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he never played the kirtan, or he was not a musician at all, comparing to Srila Prabhupada, when he was like, that was his main introductory picture of his image as a person who gives a kirtan, who glorifies the holy names. Could you please elaborate on how did Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati deal with the kirtans and glorifying of holy names? Thank you.
Yeah. I haven't heard a great deal about that, but one thing that I heard someone say, I don't know if it's accurate or not because I haven't read specifically about it, but that Bhaktisiddhanta wasn't so much not a musician as he had many disciples who were actually quite um, accomplished musicians. Many of the disciples in the Gaudiya Math were accomplished musicians, and they led uh, very excellent kirtans. But he was annoyed that they were too much into the musical aspect of the kirtan. And so therefore, sometimes purposefully, he would sing off tune or out of time just to frustrate their musical tendencies and focus them back on the real purpose of the kirtan, which was to hear the holy name. So I don't know if that's accurate or not, but someone once told that in a class that I listened to. So that's also a possibility. But I never heard anything about him particularly studying music at any time. His main focus was philosophy, and especially math and astrology. That's how we usually think of him.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
I don't see any questions in the chat so far. If anyone wants to ask Maharaj, please ask now. So, yeah.
Are you the co-host today?
Yeah, I'm the co-host. If no one has any questions, so we can wind up here. Thank you so much, Maharaj, for your wonderful lecture. Thank you.
All right.
Everyone for listening, for joining us today. Hare Krishna.
All right. Thank you all very much for attending today. Actually, to tell the life of Bhaktisiddhanta would take a lot more time. And today I wanted to really spend some time to create this PowerPoint that you just saw. So I spent a lot of time on it. And maybe some other time in another year or so, I'll be able to give a little bit of a deeper, longer lecture about the life and times of Bhaktisiddhanta. So, all glories to all of you, and thank you for tuning in and listening. And I hope you have a wonderful Sunday if you're coming to the temple here, or you're not, whichever it is. So, Hari Bo.
Thank you.
Hare
Always
Krishna, thank
terrific.
you.
It was
All
Hi, Paul Maharaj.
very well indeed. Thank you.
right.
Very well. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, host. Awesome.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you, everyone.